afternoon session will be recorded for use on our website later. So if you don't wish to have your image recorded as part of the presentation, this is an excellent time to turn off your camera. Also, we'll ask that you keep your microphone muted unless you are actively asking a question or otherwise participating in the discussion later. Thank you so much for joining us for this session on the new experience economy, the second presentation that we've hosted. My name is David Cheris. I'm joined by my colleagues from the Edmonton Arts Council, Pushali Mitra, Stephen Williams, and Justina Verboom. We're going to be making extensive use of the chat function to track questions and comments on what you're seeing and hearing. So please feel free to join in the conversation that way. But we're very pleased to have you with us today. Thank you so much. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6 territory, and that the City of Edmonton and all the people here are beneficiaries of this peace and friendship treaty. Treaty 6 encompasses the traditional territory of numerous Western Canadian First Nations and Métis people who have collectively called this area home for thousands of years. The Edmonton Arts Council is dedicated to ensuring the spirit of Treaty 6 is honored and respected. So today we are talking about the ongoing response by Albertans to the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in. Early in the pandemic response, the Edmonton Arts Council came together with Calgary Arts Development, Travel Alberta, the Calgary Foundation, the Edmonton Community Foundation, the Rose Foundation, ATB, and Angus Reid to begin work with Stone-Olafson on a long-term study on the behaviors related to arts, culture, and recreation. 4 weeks ago, we welcomed Kim Griffen and Mathew Stone to present their findings from the first phase of that study. They're now back to expand on those results as the study continues. We hope to provide Edmonton artists with reliable and relevant data about how Albertans are actually responding to this new not so normal. As we dive into this conversation, do feel free to interrupt us with questions either by audio or using the chat function, and we will stay on until we've answered as many of your questions as we're able to. We are joined for this discussion by Jesse Van Ryn from the Citadel Theatre. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kim and Mathew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making time to participate today. We're hoping to share quite a bit of the updated information that we have for you. A quick update on what we're up to. As David had mentioned, this is an ongoing longitudinal study. We're doing 6 waves of work over the next year, and the point of this research is we want to be able to build on what we know and the facts from Albertans and give you, the decision makers who are making plans for recovery and re-engagement, to have relevant, actionable data to work with. So all of that means it's Alberta-based, Edmonton-based, Calgary-focused, Edmonton-focused, where you are and where your audiences are. Today, we're going to build on what we learned a month ago and shared a month ago. We're going to show you what we learned in Wave 2. We're going to talk a little bit about how you might want to think about the results and how you might want to apply them. Any opportunity to discuss and answer questions. As David had mentioned, we have the chat function there. Please throw in questions if you have questions you see as you come up. Please, if you could hold the verbal questions to the end, that helps us with our story, but we're happy to answer any and all questions. We're available afterwards as well. And then finally, we want to make sure that the data is useful for you. And we have Jesse Van Ryn with us, as David had mentioned, we have a conversation, just how is the Citadel adapting? They've been doing some great things in terms of moving quickly, in terms of engaging audiences and bringing product to the audiences, not just audiences to the products. So we're going to have an informal conversation with Jesse and some of the things, hear what they're doing and some of the lessons they've learned. And then hopefully this is the second wave of a more ongoing conversation about how we can all reconnect with the experience economy and Albertans all together. So no further ado, why don't we jump right in? Before jumping into the results, obviously, thank you. David had mentioned these organizations We've been working with all of them: Edmonton Community Foundation, Alberta Foundation for the Arts, Edmonton Arts Council, Travel Alberta, and the rest. We are all stakeholders in this experience economy, and we truly believe in the value it has for the quality of life in our communities and what it has to enhance. This is about diversification of our economies and quality of life. So we want to do our part to support it. And so we thank these organizations for their help. Now, as I'd mentioned, this is a second wave of a longitudinal study. What does longitudinal study mean? Longitudinal study means we're going to be talking to as many of the same Albertans over 6 different waves of research so that we can compare and contrast results from early in May to next March, if we want, over 6 waves of research. In any given wave of research, we're going to be completing, in this wave, we completed 1,300 surveys from Angus Reid Forum with respondents there. We had an 85% response rate, which means that 85% of all of that sample were people who completed in the first wave. That's an excellent return, and we'll make sure that we're going to be looking forward to keeping that going. So that provides huge data advantages. So for those of you who are diving deep into the data, you'll see in the detailed tables available on the website that you can compare responses, what people said in the wave 1 to wave 2, and the data files will give you lots of flexibility. Everything that we're sharing today is primarily focused on Edmonton, but across the province, the results are balanced and weighted across for region, age, and gender. In simple terms, the sample that we have here looks and feels and is just like the rest of the population. It's very representative. So we know that what we're hearing back is very representative and leads to really accurate and really reliable results. Before jumping into the wave 2 results, I think it's really important to remember that context is everything. No research exists in a vacuum, and all of the things that are happening around us are influencing how people think and feel. That's the point of the research. When this research was completed a little while ago in July, the active case numbers were still lingering around 1,000. We know that we just they announced another 600 cases over the long weekend. But we've also noticed a notable increase in active cases in Edmonton. In the first wave of work, they were much higher than Calgary. Edmonton was almost isolated, but Edmonton has seen a significant jump. We've seen mandatory mask orders go in place in many or most jurisdictions. We've seen a massive surge in the U.S. cases and in deaths in the U.S. And I mention that because we're inundated with their media, and as you'll see in the results, that impacts how people feel. At the same time, we've seen unemployment rate jump up to 12.8. Even the most recent economic numbers show us that both business closures, which are 19,500 in March and April, were extremely high, but also job loss among specific audiences is rising and continues to rise. Alberta trails the rest of the country in terms of recapturing jobs. I think last stat that I saw that showed that Alberta has recaptured about 54% of all jobs lost earlier in the year. So things are slower economically. And then on top of that, Albertans are grappling with major decisions. David and I were just chatting before the meeting as we were testing things. People are grappling with things like going back to school, going to other events, starting to reconnect with their activities as other business options and experiences become available. So all of these things are influencing how people feel and how comfortable people are, their willingness to go and do different things. And as you'll see in the results, it's going to be a long, slow process of reconnecting with audiences with the experiences that they used to have. So what are some of the things that we're seeing in this wave? First thing, we know that we're 6 months into this whole pandemic, and despite the restrictions being lifted, we've had phase 2 restrictions in phase 2 scenario for quite some time. Comfort levels and the mood are basically the same. So people are still in that tentative spot. What do I mean by that? Well, the first thing we want to show you is what's their comfort in terms of reconnecting with Albertans. So, and I see a typo there, but their overall connection, the proportion who say that they are comfortable in large groups, 8, 9, 10, about 25%. It's almost exactly the same across the province as it was last wave. We see the most people are in that middle group. They're comfortable with their own social cohort that they've established with their family members. And ultimately, we see a small group, 20%, who are really have a low comfort. They're only keeping with themselves or their family group. So not everybody's going to react the same. What's interesting with the results this wave is that we see a direct connection between the case numbers and the reports in the media and how comfortable people feel. And in Edmonton in particular provides us a great example. We saw a particularly high comfort levels drop from 23% to 19% this wave. And overall medium comfort stay the same. But what's interesting is that low comfort has grown as well. So as case numbers in Edmonton have shot up over the summer months, comfort levels have shifted. So what this means looking forward is that as we see case numbers change and news about either a second wave or other events or other things happening around school openings, the progress we make, all of those things are going to impact how people feel and the comfort they're willing to take, they're willing to carry into social activities. Their opinion on reopening is also in flux. At the first wave, we saw about a fairly divided population. About 40% then think we're moving at the right speed. About 50% of Albertans think that's the case now. But what's interesting is the change in Edmonton. We saw 37% at that first wave said we were moving too fast. That shot up to 45%. So again, that's in direct correlation to cases, but also in direct correlation to lockstep to comfort as well. If you compare that to the rest of the province, Calgary is relatively stable. The north, central, south, they're obviously right on this, fairly stable as well. And they, generally speaking, think we're moving at the right speed. But Edmonton's a bit of an outlier at this current time. That correlates also to the state of mind. One of the things that we have to keep an eye on in the experience economy, but for all things generally, economic sentiment, all aspects, is how people feel about certain things. The dominant opinion right now is worried. About 35% of the Albertans say that the first mention is that they're worried. Their state of mind is that. We see smaller mentions of optimism, happy, curious, excited, and those might be a combination of going forward as things reopen. People see a sense of normalcy returning. But generally, there are direct links. I mean, those who think that we're reopening too fast, 47% of those people think they're worried, or say they're worried, or they have a low comfort level. Large proportions are worried. So there are significant proportions of our population and our audiences who aren't in a real positive place and aren't necessarily prime for reconnecting. Now, among the lower comfort levels, we're also seeing the perceptions and attitudes follow step. Right now, about 77% of Edmontonians are wary about interacting with people they don't know. That's up significantly from the first wave, but also significantly higher than the rest of the province. Also, we do know that there are almost two-thirds, just over two-thirds, who say we've made good progress, but now's not the time to let up. And as you read through the results, comfort levels and attitudes towards the pandemic are slightly shifting, but again, as numbers become more prevalent and people look at the caseloads, particularly in Edmonton, and we've seen a surge over the summer months, that's going to impact it. So looking forward, you're going to see as case numbers diminish or ebb and flow, and we know this is a large period of uncertainty, but as numbers go up and down, we're going to see attitudes and perceptions shift. This is extremely fluid, a dynamic situation when it comes to how people feel about the pandemic. Now, not all perspectives are universal. Our audiences don't all think the same. Some groups stand out. In Edmonton, we know that geographically, inner city residents show more uncertain attitudes, are more wary about being out with large groups. But there's one group that stands out, and that stands out in particular, and that's middle-aged men in Alberta. And they appear at first like to be out of step with others. When we look across the province, larger proportions, significantly larger proportions think we're opening too slow, they're more comfortable, they see economic uncertainty as a more serious problem, restrictions lifting as excites them. They generally seem just willing to move forward faster than the rest of the population. Now, this is not because they're just philosophically out of step with the rest of the province. And I know that there's a lot of stereotypes that may exist, particularly in the media at one point about people wearing masks. But this is not just about the pandemic. This is about those contexts that we were talking about earlier. And one thing to keep in mind is that this might be an audience that may not be philosophically misaligned to what we're talking about when it comes to the pandemic, but there are other factors. 66% of this category, so those 25 to 54-year-old men, report that their unemployment's been impacted. 51% say their income has decreased, which is a full 12 points higher than any other demographic group that we've surveyed. On top of that, 67% have some connection to COVID. Either they've been tested, they know somebody who's been tested, they know people who are in high-risk communities. All of this correlates to also economic data. When we look at the job loss factors, that group of the demographics, so middle-aged men, 25 to 54, have seen the highest proportion of job loss as well. So as these groups are impacted, their attitudes are going to change. And when you move forward, we're going to keep watching and see other demographic groups who might be impacted and see how their perceptions in relationship to the pandemic have also changed. So it's not going to be just one group being different. Many other groups are going to be different. Kim?
Thanks, Matt. So now that Matt's talked about mindset, consumer mindset, and general comfort levels and what we need, how we need to think about that, I'd like to shift our thinking now and talk a little bit about what this means for engagement. The abbreviated version is that, actually, could you slide forward there, Matt?
Yeah.
Well, there we go. All right, so what we're showing here is one of the first questions that we wanted to ask. Okay, now that some restrictions are lifting, what are some of the things that you're considering doing over the next couple months of summer? And do keep in mind that this question was surveyed earlier in the summer, so we have a little bit of time behind us. But the abbreviated version here, this is just a condensed list, shows some of the top activities that Albertans were looking at considering. And what we see is that a lot of these activities that people are thinking about really satisfy some of those main kind of benefits for getting out with big groups, so socializing, things like going to movies or going to museums. But they also, you can see from things like outdoor activities like camping and hiking, that outdoor element, that is one of the things that gave people a little extra sense of comfort over the summer, right? So these are some of the top activities that people were considering over the coming months, and you can see who's going to be more likely to consider those activities. But the really important thing to note here is that when we map this back to the types of activities that people said that they had done pre-COVID, there's a stark difference. And you can see that just without calling anything out, just from those red numbers. So 80% of Albertans have traveled within the province pre-COVID. Only 48 were even considering doing it this summer. And there's a number of reasons for that. Obviously, there's a lot of activities, if you were to look at the longer list that we asked respondents, that simply weren't available. So you can't do something that's not being offered. But many things were being offered, albeit in modified form. And so we need to keep in mind that just because the doors are open or an activity is available, it doesn't mean that people were comfortable doing it. It could have been comfort, it could have been finances, Matt touched on that, and the economic impact. It could have been scheduling. There are a number of different things. But the point here that I really want to drive home is that we're asking about intentions. What were you thinking of doing over the summer months? And intentions or consideration is always only ever a fraction of actual behavior. Rarely do people say, I want to do this, and that translates into 100% participation. So if our consideration numbers are already lower than previous behavior, it tells us that intentions are really quite soft and that the return to activity might actually be even softer than some of these numbers suggest. Now, that doesn't mean that Albertans aren't missing their activities, they are. So let's build this out a little bit further and turn our attention to how things are being replaced and what people are missing in terms of spending their money. Beyond really any specific activity, we ask this in an open-ended format, and by and large, the thing that people are still missing the most is that socialization piece. So interacting, visiting, hugging, all those kinds of things related to socialization. That's still what we want to do, and that's one of those motivations that's driving a lot of re-engagement. Travel was something that was really prominent in the summer months, and that's to be expected. And then in Edmonton specifically, you can see some of the top major events that were being missed from Edmontonians over the summer. So on average, we asked a long list of—
So awesome. I know. Yeah.
I'm just going to get somebody to mute their mic. Hearing a lot of—
Yeah, it looks really good. I know.
All right, thank you. Sorry, on average, Albertans were skipping out on almost 6 activities that they normally would have done in the summer months. So you can see there's a lot of things that we're just stepping away from and things that we have skipped. Now, last wave, we paid attention to the idea of, or the importance of social connections, and those are still really, really important. We also looked at substitution fatigue, and that softened a little bit, the idea that people are getting tired of the substitutes. And I think that part of that is that we did reopen doors to some different things, and there were different options available. We all weren't sitting behind a screen doing Zoom everything. So that helped. But what I want to call out from this slide is there's this strong realization that's really setting in that the resumption of activities just means things aren't going to be done the same way. If you look to the bottom there, that second last statement, 54% of Edmontonians say, I'm not going to be going back to doing things the same way. And for the arts and the culture segment or sector, this is even higher. In terms of those who say that they're enjoying a lot of the new ways organizations are working to keep you connected, that's also higher among arts and culture goers. So the point I want to make here is we're no longer in that contingency phase. People are starting to understand this kind of reluctant recognition that, okay, yes, things are going to be different. But for folks in the arts and culture goers, there's also a sense that I'm really enjoying some of the things that are being presented to me. So I think that's a fantastic takeaway, to know that your audiences in many ways are acknowledging that things are going to be different, so you don't need to go back to the way things were. They understand, and they're also giving you permission to try new things, and in many respects they're enjoying some of the ways that organizations are working. So that's great. And this kind of information really does allow organizations, gives them permission to reshape the way you do business. Okay, so let's turn our attention now to what Albertans are doing instead if they are indeed missing or skipping out on some of their activities. Province-wide, just looking at the blue bars there, 44% over the summer months have just been doing nothing. Just have free time, waiting to see, that sort of thing. And then below that, there's pockets of Albertans who are participating in scaled back or modified versions of their favorite activities. But 35% of Albertans, the number is similar in Edmonton, 37%, are replacing their old activities with something completely new. So this is really important because it has implications for organizations who are going to need to find a way to speak to those lapsed participants. We're talking about retention strategies. Loyalty might be compromised by restrictions and some of the new offerings that are out there. One of the things that comes to mind for me is what we think about these cohort rules. So this looks and feels a little bit different across the province and across sectors, but there's some kind of loose guidance on cohort rules. And so Albertans in many respects are being forced to scale back their formal participation. So if you can't sing in a choir and participate in your sports group, well, which one do you choose this year, depending on the rules? And if you choose one, how does the other organization draw you back over time? Will they come back? So this is something to think about just in terms of loyalty and how you can make sure that some of your audiences and your customers stick with you. Now, the natural extension of this is spending. What's going on with that? Well, and it's no surprise to see that spending on discretionary or non-essential items is down quite significantly, 59% across the province. But what's more interesting is to understand where that money is going. So 33% are saving their money with no intention of spending it in the short term. Another 39% are redirecting into other activities. Only 12% of Edmontonians say they're saving their money and planning to spend it as they normally would when things opened it up. So that's significant. That 12% is revenue that you can safely recount on. The rest is really up for grabs. So there's a risk there because there's a lot of uncertainty into where dollars could be going in the future. Okay, so if we've looked at spending and activities and where people are putting their time, as you start to plan out from here, we need to start to understand what people are expecting from organizations. The first point is really simple and might seem obvious, but it's about communication. Communication is absolutely critical. When we ask audiences, what do they want to hear from organizations, we presented them with a list. And the top two items are about providing updates on opening and providing information on refunds. So this might seem obvious, but there are plenty of organizations out there who are not offering this at this point. And it's going to impact them. Some organizations maybe aren't sure what to say. They don't know when they're going to be open. They don't know what to do next. Others might be holding on and not offering information and refund. I do know a couple organizations like this just because they can't afford to lose those dollars. But the problem is that's going to impact organizations in a negative way. This kind of baseline information, just regular updates, is really, really critical to inspiring trust and confidence. And that's one thing that people are really looking for. So even if you don't have much to say yet, just talk to your audiences. That's the first thing. Albertans and Edmontonians just want to be in the know. Once they have information in hand, then they can make better decisions on how they want to participate. And there are there are a number of Albertans who want to, are looking for content or new experiences. So that is available to them. And then the next thing here is that audiences are listening. So if we know that they want to hear from you, how can we be sure that they are going to hear from you? Well, we know that they are listening. About 85% of Edmontonians are still following news of the pandemic quite or very closely. That's a little higher than the rest of Albertans, and it goes back to what Mathew was saying about what's going on in your neck of the woods, right? Higher caseload, a lot going on. In the summer, Edmonton became a hub city, so I don't know all of the feelings around that, but that's a big news story. So there was a lot of people still following news of the pandemic quite closely. So interest really is strong. And they're consulting a range of sources to get this information. The top sources are primarily online, but we're seeing things like online news sites, government sites, TV, and Facebook as some of our top sources. And so understanding sources can be a really useful lens to see how Albertans and Edmontonians shape their perceptions, especially when you have sources like Facebook on, just go back one minute, thanks. Especially when you have sources on social media like Facebook that have that potential for misinformation. So it's important to understand where people are getting their news, but it also means that you have outlets that you can use to reach your audiences because they are looking for information and they're paying attention. Now, here's the thing. Most news we get when it's COVID related tends to have a net negative impact on Albertans and how they feel about re-engaging. So we've just presented this list here and said, okay, when you see news about the following, how does it make you feel about re-engaging with your activities? And that red and pink bar is a net negative impact. Now, anything about a second wave, coverage in the events in the US, and I'm working from the bottom up, tends to be more negative. When we see things like, I just want information on openings or updated stats, we see a little bit more positive response. So part of this is a challenge with our media and the type of coverage that's available out there. But that's the first step, is that knowing that in our current climate, news information tends to have a stronger net negative impact on re-engaging. And this is stronger in Edmonton. However, we'll move forward. The point is that Albertans are still paying attention. So what can we do with that in a positive sense? When we look at things like media stories, marketing, promotion, anything that has been out there about encouraging Albertans to participate or visit attractions, there's quite a high awareness of this kind of messaging. So 79% of Albertans and Edmontonians have noticed something at the very least. And then when we flip the switch and say, well, how does that impact your intent to engage? It's a much different story than the news cycle. Now, there are large portions who say they're not really impacted by this type of messaging, and that's the gray bars through the middle there, but that's fine, that's not negative. But we do see much larger green bars on this chart than we did on the previous one. And so that's a strong positive impact. And the takeaway here is we're not seeing the fatigue or the hostility towards traditional marketing or advertising that we might have 6 months ago. Everyone can probably reflect back on March, April. You were getting an email from every company that you had ever done business with, and it got a little bit exhausting. But if somebody had said, hey, buy now, you know, we're slashing our prices, at that time, it would have felt very tone deaf. So we've kind of flipped the switch a bit. People are looking for a little bit of normalcy, and so traditional marketing messages are working much better. There's a receptivity out there, and people are open to it. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mathew.
It's interesting that the market is just being filled with news and not necessarily with opportunities. So this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of detailed data. We don't want to swamp you with all these numbers, but a couple of things that we want to take away. So if those are some of the current realities, where do we want to go from here? Some of this might be pretty obvious. I think the first thing is to take away is that comfort levels aren't changing dramatically. Even though we've been in a period of restrictions lifting, the influence of the media, the news around us, the lack of marketing in the market, opportunities to re-engage are not necessarily changing dramatically. Comfort levels just aren't rebounding to where they once were before. So an audience have yet to show that they're really tolerant of any risks. And that's something that we're going to explore more in the future. But as a result, organizations need to temper their expectations about reconnecting audiences. We get this question frequently: how should I begin planning? What should I be thinking about? Ultimately, the two things we tell people is, first off, you're not going to be re-engaging audiences in the same way we used to. And we know that now that we have a couple of periods of data, that even if restrictions go away and everything was fixed, comfort levels are going to take some time to come back. So plan on this and prepare. It's past the time for contingency plans, and organizations need to reevaluate their organizational approaches. So update your performance measures, look at scenario planning, revisit those priorities, and look at creating new ways to engage. Again, it sounds self-evident and obvious, but it's a really fundamental point that some organizations haven't quite wrapped their head around. The other key takeaway is that we're noticing in the marketing that audiences are really paying attention to all sorts of pandemic news, but there's also impactful opportunities organizations can make as we put news out there. And getting audiences comfortable enough is not going to be just a matter of lifting restrictions or making things open. Some of it's going to rebound over time naturally, that's fine, and some of it's going to be addressed by government, but also there's going to be opportunities to build confidence in what you're doing to safeguard their health. So if you're out there marketing and promoting opportunities to engage in new ways, show the steps that you're taking. Okay, talk about the tools that are being employed to protect audiences. Don't merely just say, hey, we've got hand washing or face masks or social distancing. Talk about all those things, but also in terms of their health. And that helps increase comfort and in turn consideration to be moving forward. At the end of the day, it's obvious audiences and markets are changing. There are new barriers to address. The barriers to engagement that used to exist for the arts community even 8 months ago aren't necessarily the same. So as the mindsets are shifting, different target audiences are going to emerge. And it could be a deep opportunity to engage new groups. One of the questions we saw earlier was about middle-aged men being a primary audiences. You're absolutely right. Not necessarily going to be an audience before, but this is an audience that is eager to get back to normal. And if we're able to tap into their social motivations and their experiential motivations, is there a way to engage them with your offer? Second is the younger Albertans, for example. They've always been keen experience engagers. We also know that they're still missing their activities more than ever, yet they're not necessarily as comfortable as they were before. So younger Albertans may not have been the first to line up and buy tickets, but they are keen engagers of the arts community generally. So there may be ways as we're coming out of the pandemic to connect with these audiences in new ways. And your audience profile is most certainly going to change. Fourth big thing, and this is an emerging trend. Obviously, this is the time for us to find our voice. Everybody's listening and they're looking closely for news around the pandemic and are eager for updates. And it's fascinating to see the impact of the news that has on people's intentions to go. But they want to know when experiences are going to be available again. And when we ask them straight up what types of information they want the basics. Even if you don't have the basics, now is the time to start providing it. So we often hear this, well, we don't know what our plans are yet. I think at the first day is that if you're engaging in a conversation, is to remind them that you're still there and you're thinking about it. And in many cases, this might be the time to ask them, we're looking at new things in the future. How can we connect with you? Two, if you're prepared to offer experiences, don't hesitate to promote them. There's a vacuum in the marketplace. Kim talked about that to last point. Right now, the news dominates what people know about the pandemic, but they're eager and they respond well to messages. So look at ways that you can remind them about that you're there, first off, but also the benefits that you delivered. So don't necessarily speak in terms of the product, but also speak in terms of the benefits that you deliver from a social perspective, from an experiential perspective, and a community perspective. So all the motivations that we talked about in the first one. And then also be ready to talk about what you're doing to keep them safe. This is absolutely vital that we all have to think about and talk about it. It's not something that we can put on the back burner anymore. Last thing, and I think this is absolutely key, is we started to see this trend early pre-pandemic, but it's been accelerated. One of the interesting things about the pandemic that we've heard from other sources as well is that one of the net outcomes of the pandemic has been to accelerate trends that were existing already. And one of the slower moving trends we saw in some audiences, particularly when it came to the experience economy, was a desire for different and change and an avoidance of the same all the time. So that trend has been accelerated. So staying put with the offer that you used to have isn't necessarily going to work in this case, mainly because comfort levels aren't necessarily allowing for large crowds to come together. So if you can move into hybrid offers, not just digital alone or in-person alone, is that an opportunity? We've seen some organizations do that. Can you still leverage the intrinsic motivations that you have in new ways? So consider, first off, the thing that most organizations should think about is go back to your core. Why are they there? Who is there? how do you deliver on those motivations? And it's when you have that understanding, you can start to think about the product that you can offer, not just what you've always done or adapting what you've always done. Are there new or unique ways to deliver existing programs? Can you reach new audiences with what you've done? Something that we might be able to talk to Jesse about in a little bit, but looking at ways of doing that might be able to reinvigorate people's connections to the brand. And then finally, for those, not every organization is able to just say, hey, we can adapt and switch or offer new. May not have the resources, but they may be able to look at digital accompaniments that can maintain the engagement with the audiences in the short term in the absence of in-person experiences. So ultimately, if you free up your planning and you think about those terms, look at applying this, because your data is telling us over and over again that they're not, yes, they want updates on what's going to happen, but they're also significant portions eager for the experiences in new ways. So look at those and say, hey, how can we reframe what we've always done? As I mentioned, this is the second wave of many, some things that we're moving forward. This is a fluid. We're not doing the same survey over and over again. The first thing, and some of you may have seen a survey from us if you're subscribers to the research, what we're looking for in the next wave is to start testing options for action. So what are initiatives, things that people are trying and thinking about to reconnect with audiences? Those are things that we want to test. So if you haven't completed that short survey from someone on our team has sent out, please take the time to do it. We want to know what are some of the things that you're thinking about. Are there test programs, new initiatives? We want to test those. The other thing that's really important is we're starting to get into the time where we can start to test the promises that organizations can make. So our audience is going to respond to promises of social experiences or familiar experiences or something unique or different. What is the promise? Not necessarily the specific message, but the promise that organizations in the experience economy have to make in order to start to reconnect. We're going to keep our eye on seasonality. It's less about weather, but about time of year. With school going back, it's a clear mark in the calendar for the experience economy. So we're going to see the impact of that. And then we're going to start to factor in the whole idea of risk tolerance. For the last 4 months, we've been talking about comfort levels, and we're starting to see that as people's action behaviors come in, it's not going to be just about comfort. It's also going to be their tolerance for taking a risk to go. Because we're hearing quite clearly in the media, but also in medical experts, that this risk isn't necessarily just going to go away overnight, even if there is a vaccine. So we're going to start to factor that into how people might make decisions as well. This is the tip of the iceberg. By all means, we can provide more information. And if you haven't signed up already, there's more detailed reports at Stone-Olafson.com/insights. If you want more information or additional context, further support, we're here to help, so feel free to contact us. So that ends the data sharing, the data dump part of the presentation. Are there questions that, I see a few questions coming up in the chat, but are there other questions that have been spurred by the presentation so far today? And I turn it over to either on chat or voice. Well, what we can do is we'll turn it over. We're going to have a conversation. We invited Jesse Ryan. I'm going to ask Jesse to bring her camera up, and maybe more questions will come up in chat. We'll bring that up. So, hi, Jesse.
Hi.
So I want to welcome
How are
Jesse
you?
Van Ryan. I'm great, and yourself?
I'm good, thanks.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being with us. To the rest of the group, this is Jesse Van Ryan, with producer of Citadel. We wanted to bring an example. We've done this with other groups, but we wanted to bring a local example of an organization and leaders who are making adjustments and changes and share a little bit about what they're doing, and hopefully that can help instill a conversation or give you some examples of organizations that are doing it moving forward. So, Jesse, thanks for coming. I appreciate you making time for us. The Citadel was really quick to act in engaging audiences through the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that your team has done to stay connected and deliver experiences in the last few months?
Sure. So I think with many of us on the call, there was that fateful week in March where news started filtering through that closures were coming. And we were, March 13th, I believe, maybe the 15th, we were in the dress rehearsal for the Garneau block in the McLab Theater. And we had gotten the news that day that we would not be able to have, because of the gathering limits, we would have to postpone the rest of the show, along with Peter Pan Goes Wrong and the majority of the rest of our spring programming. And so from there, we had about a week or so of just scrambling to get everyone working from home, kind of figuring out how it was going to work for us, and what the coming months might look like. And at that point, it was we thought maybe it would be a month or two, and we weren't really sure how it would progress. And right away, one of the plans we put in place was the Stuck in the House series, which allowed, we had 80 artists, each received small honorariums to do 10-minute pieces or less in their homes. And it ranged from, it was all Edmonton-based artists, from musicians to comedians to actors to playwrights. And so that really allowed for us to right away pivot to online programming. And we weren't trying to recreate a theater going experience. It was more of a chance to get money into the hands of artists who needed it at that point, and still do, and connect them. Overall, a lot of our programming is artists, audiences, and how can we keep everyone connected. And so the Stuck in the House series, it ran on YouTube and Facebook for 2 months and a bit. We have over 100,000 views racked up on it. It was really great. I highly recommend checking it out. I can drop that into the chat box after, but it's a really fantastic series. And then from there, we did the Escape series with the support. Oh, I should mention that the Stuck in the House series was supported by the Edmonton Community Foundation, and then the Escape series, which was funded by the Edmonton Arts Council and the Edmonton Community Foundation. And that Escape series we released in July, and those were 4 online narrative experiences that were created using physical distancing measures and folks having to use what they had around their house. But the idea was to, instead of just doing the Stuck in the House pieces, which were solo pieces, we wanted to try and encourage artists to work together as much as they might be able to within the confines of their homes and all of the mess of COVID closure. So we had 4 really great projects out of that. We had 1 Zoom rom-com, we had a short film series, we had an audio experience, and then we had a murder mystery. So those were available on our website through the end of August. And we also had the industry series, which started in May and went every Monday through even through the summer. And those were an opportunity for us to do professional development, 90-minute sessions weekly with artists across the country, from Dubai, India, London, and across Canada. And that was an opportunity to connect playwrights, directors, designers, that sort of thing. But the cool thing about the industry series was, while it was meant for artists, we also had audience members participate. And so it was really great for them to be able to see that side of the work. But overall, that was a really positive experience and has been since. We had each week about between 80 to 150 participants on those sessions, which we do on Zoom. And then one of the other big discoveries was how much we've needed Zoom to stay connected, as along with Teams and all of the other online components that we're using. And one thing that I discovered that early March was, everybody meeting for the first time on the video call, and Daryl Cloran, our artistic director, being like, "Jessie, can you learn Zoom and tell us all about it?" And so since then, I've become the local, the Citadel Zoom expert, which has been really cool. We've one of the other things we did on Zoom just a couple weeks ago is we did a development, a fundraising experience with IG, and it was a paint night with our head scenic painter. And so all of the participants, they were Edmond-based clients of the company. They received paint kits and a bottle of wine. And then I hosted this paint night with the painter. And there was just 2 hours of banter while everyone got to watch kind of Bob Ross style, step-by-step techniques for painting, which was unexpected and just a really neat way to connect with an audience at that point. We had our theater school classes run over the summer, both online and in person, with all of the physical distancing measures and hygiene measures in place and masks. And then we also had, at that point, once we were hosting bodies in the theater, there was a chance for us to start going to where our audiences were. We couldn't host them in the building. We weren't ready to do that yet, but we wanted to make sure that we were getting artists and audiences back together in person, sharing the same space. And those spaces happened to be outside. And so we added the Roadshow series, which was a door-to-door kind of concert series with 3 different touring 45-minute shows, 2 performers each with 1 technician, and audience members could book those as a package, would book a show, and the company would show up, perform on their front lawn or in their business parking lot, on an acreage,
Awesome.
on the patio of somebody's apartment building. And so that happened in August and is going through the end of September. And then we did Horizon Lab a couple weekends ago. So that was our first, Horizon Lab was our first chance to welcome folks back into the building. And that was Friday, Saturday night in our Schachter Theater, which is 685 seats. And we hosted no more than 100 people, thanks to the gathering ban, in each space. And we blocked off aisles. We had partitions. All of the audience members were masked. Lots of hand sanitizer, hand washing stations, the paperless playbills, all of that. So that first chance to get back in the theater, that was the first time a lot of us weren't working at home those 2 weeks. We were able to go back into the office, and it was magical. Like it was so strange being back in the building and making art, and just the hope and the energy of just working together again on something. And it was 5 different groups of 2 to 3 artists each from the BIPOC or LGBTQ plus or disabled community. And each of them created a 5-minute piece, and that'll be online and available probably, hopefully, depending on how long the editing process goes, we're hoping to have it online by the end of next week. And that was funded by EPCOR and the Edmonton Community Foundation. So the nice thing about the Horizon Lab was that we invited folks back into the building, but we also have an online component available, like the hybrid offering that you were mentioning. And the tickets that we did for the Horizon Lab, they were by donation. And we did have some attrition. We sold out, we sold out the 100 seats per night. Those 200 seats, our stock was sold out. But then on the night of, we only had about, 50 people on the Friday, and then 80 people on the Saturday. So we did, because with any free event, there's the possibility that, and especially given current COVID climate, that folks might change their mind about attending on that particular day, depending on what's going on. So
that is a ton of activity.
That's all.
Can the roads go down to Calgary? Is that too late?
No. I'm not sure if there's actually, I know that there's so many different things. I know the ESO is doing stuff. I'm not sure what's happening in Calgary in terms of pop, rock, or musical theater, but that's what our offerings were. But I do know that there's singer-songwriters doing a similar thing. You see this popping up all over the country, this type of
slowly happening. It's interesting. I love the connection that you've clearly drawn between the audience and the artistic community and the experience. What's the feedback you're hearing from the community in terms of not just necessarily one, but in terms of the whole suite of efforts?
It's been positive. It's been very positive. Like the Horizon Lab, our survey that we got back was, asking folks how comfortable they felt coming to the theater. And one thing we did in advance was we sent out 3 different messages in advance. Like normally you get your confirmation email and then you get your reminder email the day before, and we sent out one extra one that detailed our plans to make sure that folks felt safe and that they knew exactly what to expect when they came to the building, especially because we are closed. Like the building, this 5-venue city block complex in downtown Edmonton that people are used to, like going in any door, taking the LRT, crossing through Canada Place. It's all locked down right now due to the lack of activity. And so just to maintain security and audience flow and that sort of thing, we had to be very specific with, like, you're coming in this door, you're parking here. And but one thing we were able to say is, like, this is the itemized list of what that we've done to keep you safe and what we expect of you to kind of share the space with us. And the same thing with the artists. That was a key thing for the Horizon Lab artists, was being very transparent with what we wanted to make sure their experience was in terms of the health and safety around COVID protocol.
Right. That's spectacular. When you think about this, we see lots of organizations who tend to try a bunch of different things, which is great. Some have a guiding principle or a strategy or a main idea behind linking everything. what was the thought process for the team when you're thinking about, when you're sitting down and trying everything? What's the thoughts behind the leadership when you're thinking about what you guys are doing?
Number one thing it's been since March is pivot and being flexible and being open to shifting expectation around how we normally produce, especially with less staff. We had to do partial layoffs of some of our staff, and we do have, many of us are on wage subsidy. And so just confronting that, but we've always done it this way, acknowledging that there is a new way that we have to do it based on just the scenario that we're in right now. And so flexibility has been key, and yeah, just pivot, being ready to pivot. Like writing grants right now, like it's almost impossible because you're writing for something for next spring, but it might not, like, we just don't know. So yeah, it's been like that for the staff and for how we engage with audiences, is being ready to do the work. Like we've got in future plans, like coming up in the next few months, we have, we announced in June that our hope was to do small projects through the fall, and we're moving ahead with that, and how we might be hosting the Horizon Lab was a general admission so that we could seat people based like an airline in terms of getting them in the building and then deplaning them. Whereas the next round of shows, projects that we do, we would like to do ticketed with reserved seats, and what that might look like for that seating method. And then yeah, just how we might engage with folks through the winter. Like right now with the road shows, because the weather's been nice, we can meet people in their homes or at their work, at their business, places of business. But what does that mean for engaging and activating our building or using our building through the winter, along the lines of keeping art moving and connecting audiences, but utilizing what we have. Lots of looking into a lot of outdoor heaters. I think there's going to be a run on propane heaters again. So.
I'm curious when you think, and I want to ask you about your fall plans. It's not a trick question, but I want to hear what's in store for the fall. But when you do all of this, there has to be some kind of return. So what's been some of the feedback, not feedback, but some of the unexpected maybe, or surprise or planned return? Have you seen new audiences? Are you seeing more revenue? What are you getting out of this? What are some of the potential opportunities for the Citadel?
I think right now it's still I can't scoop our news, but that's coming out hopefully in the next week or two. But the hope is that the offerings are familiar, that folks feel comfortable coming back, and that the information we share helps them prepare for their experience. I hope, we all hope that there's going to be new audiences that might have become more aware of Citadel over the last couple of months, or that one thing we did hear a lot of at the Horizon Lab shows of the subscribers that were there was how hungry they were to come back and how comfortable they felt once they were there, seeing what we had done and put in place for them to feel safe. And so hoping that those measures that we had a test, we have this proof of concept test phase with Horizon Lab, what that might look like through the fall and these new offerings, and what that might mean. So new folks definitely, but also using the space in a different way, like using the Shockter Theater for smaller audiences, because that space allows for us to allow folks to do the physical distancing between the different households.
Fascinating. We all struggle with the challenges. If you had to isolate a few challenges that have been sort of consistently there over the last few months, are there a couple that stand out?
Money, the lack of money.
I should have said besides money.
Besides money, yeah, no, that's obviously the big one is we've been very fortunate in utilizing grants that we already had, project grants that we were able to retool for some of these programs I've mentioned, as well as accessing the Edmonton Community Foundation's Rapid Response Fund. So, yeah, challenges. I think audience expectation is and the mystery, like not the whole point of the research and the whole point of us meeting today is just trying to figure out how we're going to welcome people back, and if they're going to be ready to come back with us.
Right. So. Yeah, that uncertainty is a big challenge. Even the community is sort of dealing with it.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that the comfort level eases or gets better once they're through the door and seeing it.
Yeah. I think that's, and overloading them, like having, we we had so much information available to them, but we put the breadcrumbs there of just like, if you would like more information, and then if you clicked on it, it was like everything.
Yeah.
So that if there was anybody with any amount of anxiety, they could have that information, and it wasn't a black hole of like question mark. And they could prepare emotionally, mentally about and make their plans of how they were going to access the building and get to their seat and have that familiarity. And that's the same thing with any conversation we have in terms of audience accessibility, is that storyboarding of, this is going to be my experience from when I pull up to the theater to when I get to my seat. This is where the bathroom is. This is where the box office is. We want to make sure that those visual stories are potentially available. And that's also something we've been able to utilize this period of closure, is looking at how Citadel Theatre can be more welcoming and safe for everyone. So
yeah, it has a long-term impact. That's something we heard from other organizations that have really worked to pivot quickly. Is they said, listen, we're not going to do stuff just for now. We're going to do stuff that we might conceivably keep doing for a long time later.
Exactly. Especially with the online component. A lot of theater companies haven't necessarily made that pivot to looking at how they're streaming online. And of course, there's struggles and challenges around that, especially with Citadel. We're a Canadian, we're a CTA company with the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, which means that we're beholden to certain industry sector agreements. And one of those things is working with the Canadian Actors Equity Association, and putting theater online all of a sudden turns it into, you're in film mode. And we've got conversations that we need to have with ACTRA now, which is the Actors Union for Film and TV and Radio. So we've been very lucky with that. With the Horizon Lab, we're putting that online, and we've been able to utilize a separate COVID response initiative that ACTRA has in place for that. So
yeah, what I find interesting about some of the things that you guys are doing is that it's not just taking what you used to do and putting it on Zoom or on YouTube. It's core to your brand, because live experiences are core to the theater experience. So seeing you recreated in new ways and in hybrid ways even is fascinating.
Yeah.
Jesse, I have one more question for you, and to the rest of the group, if you have questions for Jesse, please, we'd love to hear them. Jesse, you guys, the Citadel's a fairly prominent organization, and I applaud you for all the things that your team has done. That is awesome. What I find more fascinating is how you've done it, so like what you've been doing in the organizational approach. What advice would you have for other organizations who may not have necessarily the resources that Citadel has or the team size? Are there some overriding principles or advice that you would give to any leader in this sector to say, how should we reconnect, or what are some best things that we should be doing to stay connected and recover from this?
I would say one of the biggest learnings right now that we've had with our team is patience, the meeting folks where they're at, especially given that we have a lot of different folks working from home and have different lifestyles or life situations that are needing to be managed, including, working from home with kids or that sort of thing. So patience and understanding on that side of things, but really utilizing the ideas of other staff members, like being able to have more opportunity to meet online and brainstorm together and say, like, we have these resources, we have this really small grant, this pocket of money that we could utilize, or what can we do that's free, or what can we do that utilizes people that are on the wage subsidy. How can we, like, for example, we were able to bring back some of the members in our scenery shop, and we were able to have them pivot and create plexiglass dividers. And so with the smaller organizations or organizations that might not be theater or that, I think it's just trying to use what you've got, and especially the people that you're working with. And also, big thing is ask for help. Like the Citadel, while I might not be sitting on a bunch of money, I have time right now to help other organizations. And one thing we've been able to do is collaborate and provide advice to other companies that are looking to host live events in the fall. And so one thing I'm willing to do is share the materials I have or share the learnings we have of this is what we sent to our audience. This is what the artists got in advance of coming. And just trying to be transparent about those learnings that we had and the tools we created so that somebody else isn't spending their time, their limited time creating something from scratch. So if anybody on this call would like any of my stuff, send me an email. I'm happy to share it. Thank you, Matthew. So that's the other thing, is connecting within community and just trying to help each other out. So yeah,
that's great. Thank you so
much.
I think
that both of those things, like within your team and within your community, and doing what you can together with what you've got.
Yeah, there's going to be an interesting opportunity, I think, with lots of organizations that are collaborating to offer experiences. We talked about this at Wave 1, where there's very few pure theater audiences or pure performance art or even sports fans. We share all of those audiences. There's so much overlap. So I think there's going to be interesting opportunities for collaboration within this art sector, but also across the experience economy. So,
totally.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It was great learnings. Thank you so much. Again, if there's any other questions from the group, please let them fly. We'd love to hear them. And for that time, David, thank you for having us. Really appreciate it. Oh, yeah, Stephen, I think one of the things that we heard too was an opportunity to share what we've learned, the shared audience discussion from Wave 1. One of the questions, when we looked at the research from the first wave, we learned that Alberta experience economy encapsulates virtually everybody. About 99% of Albertans participate in one way or another, either by seeing, doing, or actually attending. And across different sectors, there's virtually everybody shares the different audiences, whether they're in festivals, there are sports and recreation, or arts, or travel. And in the arts sector, for example, only 8% of the overall population only does arts. The rest do other things as well. So strongly recommend you, if you're interested in how those overlap exists and how it exists across different opportunities. If you can look at Wave 1 for the first wave of research, or you can send me a note and I can provide more details in the research as well. Any other questions? Well, thank you everyone for having us. David, I'm going to turn it back to you if that's all right. And we really appreciate the opportunity for having us. Thank you so much for having us, David.
And many happy returns, Matthew. Thank you all so much. And Jesse, thank you so much for sharing the extraordinary work that you've been doing with the Citadel. So that's it. I'm going to be sending all of you a copy of the presentation that you've seen here. The audio-visual version will be making it to our YouTube channel probably in the next week or so. And we look forward to talking with you further about your own ideas about the next steps. Again, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone. It was great.